Good morning, Vietnam. To the land of millions of motor scooters, to the land of beautiful people, to the land of exquisite cuisine. Good morning, Vietnam, to the land of beautiful scenery, and unfortunately, memories of war. Vietnam is a country in Southeast Asia. The country extends about 1,025 miles from north to south and is about 30 miles wide east to west at its narrowest part. If we put a map of the country of Vietnam on top of a map of the United States, we can see that the length of the country is the same distance as the distance from Ludington, Michigan to Tallahassee, Florida, taking a more scenic route than the crow would fly. Culture and customs differ from the north to the south, just like in the United States. People in the north work more hours than people in the south. People in the north spend their money more conservatively. People in the south tend to spend more money than they earn. In the north, fish is often the main dish, served with a tasty fish sauce. The food in the south is sweeter, and people tend to eat out more. People's lives are affected by the seasons of the year. In the north, there are four seasons. The central part of Vietnam experiences two seasons, while the south part of Vietnam has only one season. Vietnam shares its border with China, Laos, and Cambodia. Its coastline borders the Gulf of Tonkin, the South China Sea, and the Gulf of Thailand. Lakai in the far north is the main border crossing into China. The muddy Red River separates the two countries. Some of the Vietnamese have green cards allowing them to cross the border daily to work in China. Tourists can easily access a one-day visa and walk across the bridge into the country. Crossing the border by train is more complicated, as the distance between the rails in China is different than the distance between the rails in Vietnam. So the passengers are required to wait until the railroad men have adjusted the wheels on the train to fit the tracks. The flags of Vietnam tell the story that when the Vietnam War ended in 1975, the North Vietnamese set up a communist government. However, the government discovered that the economy was not successful under communist principles. So in 1986, Vietnam launched a political and economic innovation campaign that introduced reforms intended to facilitate the transition from a centralized economy to a socialist oriented market economy. Some private ownership of land is now allowed and individual wealth is increasing. Vietnam is moving into a globalized capitalist economy. Vietnam has a population of 100 million. 89% of the population is under 60 years of age. 25% of the population is under the age of 15. Of the 100 million people, 85% of the population are Vietnamese. 15% of the population belong to minority ethnic groups. The Black Thai are a minority group living in the mountains of northern Vietnam. These ladies are wearing the traditional Vietnamese national dress of a silk tunic with pants. The tunic is slit to the waist, allowing the women to more easily sit on a motorbike. A Black Thai woman ties her hair into a tall bun on top of her head to indicate that she is married. A ritual is held to comb and tie up her hair before she goes to her husband's house as his wife. The groom's family chooses a special day to organize a high bun ceremony for the bride. One can identify one's minority ethnic group by looking at their traditional clothing. These women belong to the Red Dao minority group living in the mountains of northern Vietnam. Their traditional dress is a long blouse over trousers with a colorful embroidery accent. The Red Dao of Sapa can be identified by looking at their apron. There's one in the front and one in the back. They wear bright colored red triangular scarves on their heads. The Black Hmong can be identified in northern Vietnam by the colorful skirts and colorful headpieces that they wear. The Black Hmong are noted for their skill to learn English quickly, and so they serve as tour guides. The Hmong people were persecuted after the war because they worked with the Americans. Many immigrated to the United States and settled in such places as California, Iowa, and Minnesota. 61% of the Vietnamese population live in rural areas. The country remains at a low level of urbanization in comparison with other neighboring countries. The rural areas of Vietnam are beautiful. Rice is the most important crop, and rice fields dominate the landscape. Rice is usually the main food served at every meal. In the rural mountain areas in the northern parts of Vietnam, fields are terraced. Vegetables such as cabbage and tomatoes are grown in the villages for export to the cities. Vietnamese farmers depend on their water buffalo for milk and to aid in planting their crops. The water buffalo often wanders through the rice fields, eating the grass or the rice plants. It is common to see farmers in the rice fields barefoot or wearing boots to protect them from the leeches. Villagers raise jackfruit. Jackfruit is heart healthy. It contains some fiber and has no fat. It is a great meat substitute, just as bananas are. This is a cassava plant, which is a nutty flavored root vegetable. Cassava is a good source of vitamin C. The roots of the cassava plant are dried and then prepared. If not prepared properly, they may cause cyanide poisoning. Farmers grow black beans and dry them in the sun. After harvesting, peanuts are also dried in the sun before they are sold in the market. In some of the Hmong villages, lotus flowers are raised. Lotus are often found in the muddy waters of lakes and ponds in Vietnam. However, they are also grown in gardens, placed in pots and allowed to produce flowers. The flowers are then sold in the market, especially during Tet, the Vietnamese New Year celebration. Every part of the lotus plant is used. The stems of the lotus plant are used to produce silk, as shown on the left side of the picture. Raw lotus roots are cut up and used in salads. Lotus seeds are eaten raw, dried, or boiled. And lotus leaves are used to wrap food before it is steamed. Trucks come to the villages to pick up the produce from market. It is the women, dressed in their traditional dress, who often go to the market to sell their produce and socialize. Pork is usually on every menu. Hog's feet were available at the market. The sacred power of dogs make dog meat a special dish on particular occasions, such as weddings and funerals. Eating dog meat after a bad event is said to dispel bad luck and contribute to longevity. Notice the dog displayed in the background of this vegetable exhibit. When the guide was asked if he eats his own dog, his response was, "No, we eat our neighbors." All parts of an animal are used in their cooking. Chicken and ducks were also popular choices on any menu. Pastries are beautiful and delicious. Little donuts were served every morning in the fancy hotels. A wide variety of vegetables, eggs, and live chickens. Sticky rice and nuts could also be found for sale. These bamboo pipes can be also bought at the market. They are a popular smoking device in Vietnam. Strong nicotine leaves are smoked through these pipes, and immediately the nicotine enters the bloodstream. Smokers experience a strong dizziness. A wide variety of textiles is available for the shopper. This village is just 20 minutes by motorbike from the Sapa market. It is the home of the Hmong and Red Dao minority ethnic groups. They are noted for their use of hemp and indigo in making and dyeing fabric for clothes and crafts. On the hillsides near the village, the Hmong people grow indigo plants. These plants have broad green leaves and barely purple flowers. They typically yield a crop twice a year. The leaves of the indigo plant are harvested and fermented with various additives such as rice wine, urine, or lye. The Hmong women push the fabric into tubs of bubbling blue dye. 30 minutes later, they fish the cloth out and hang it to dry. The longer the fabric is in the dye, the darker it will become. For some ethnic minority groups, the darker the indigo, the more prized the cloth becomes. The method of dyeing, hanging, and drying must be repeated twice a day for 1 month to achieve the right depth of color. Once the cloth has been made into clothing, it is then decorated with hand embroidery work. Sometimes it takes almost a year for an outfit to be finished. Officially, state controlled Vietnam is an atheist state. However, many of the citizens are religious. The three main religions are Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Some people combine elements of all three as they worship. About 7% of the population are Catholics. Ancestry worship is practiced in many homes, and some northern ethnic minority groups still practice shamanism. Places of worship are historically interesting and often beautiful. The Temple of Literature in Hanoi was dedicated to Confucius in 1070. He and his disciples are honored here. The temple has 5 courtyards, each with its own ornate entrance. The center section features a pond called the Well of Heavenly Clarity. 6 years after the temple was dedicated, the temple began to host the Imperial Academy, Vietnam's first national university. It was the biggest educational center in Vietnam under the feudal regime and trained thousands of scholars. This altar was built in memory of the very famous headmaster. Courses covered literature, poetry, calligraphy, and mathematics. The exams were said to be notoriously difficult. To honor those men who passed their exams and received a doctorate degree, 82 stelae were erected in the courtyard and mounted on top of giant tortoises. The 1,307 men's names and birth dates were etched on the back and front of the stelae. The tortoise was used Because the tortoise is sacred in Vietnam and symbolizes wisdom and longevity. This pagoda complex is the oldest Buddhist temple in Hanoi. It was built in 541 AD and is located on a small island in Westlake. Inside the temple are many altars dedicated to Buddha. The Buddha can be symbolized as a man or a woman. On the grounds, there is a striking 11-story stupa. Each opening on the stupa on the 11 floors displays a statue of Buddha. There are also smaller stupas surrounding the larger one. Halou, the first capital of Vietnam, established in the 10th century, is about 70 miles south of Hanoi. It was picked by the emperor because it is backed by sharply rising mountains, making it easy to defend the country from northern invaders. Ding Bang Ling was an illustrious general who fought to defeat the warlords and unite the country in prehistoric Vietnamese times. He successfully defeated the warlords and began to develop the country of Vietnam. Unfortunately, assassins took his life and that of his older son while they were sleeping, ending his reign after only 11 years. Despite another younger son being next in succession, he was deemed too young to rule. To fill the gap in leadership, Ding Ban Ling's former military commander promptly became the emperor, married the dead king's widow, and founded the early Lei dynasty. The dynasty continued many of the reforms and wishes of Ding Ban Ling, and so was quite successful. After the general's death, the capital of Vietnam was moved to Hanoi and remained the capital until 1802. This temple is located in Lakai, on the border between China and Vietnam. It is considered a national relic. It was built in the 1700s and mixes elements of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism in worship. People who practice shamanism are mostly among those belonging to ethnic minority groups, many of whom have a shaman in their village. A shaman serves as an intermediary between humankind and the spirit. Most Vietnamese families today have an ancestral altar placed in a prominent spot in their home. On special occasions like the ancestors' deaths, anniversaries, or the Lunar New Year, special rites are performed to communicate with the dead. When a Vietnamese person passes away, it is believed that one's life does not end, but that the afterlife begins. The afterlife requires basic necessities such as food, clothing, and money, all of which a family must provide for its deceased loved ones. Many Vietnamese, especially in the north, honor their dead with reburials, normally 3 to 5 years after their loved ones are first laid to rest. In the dead of night, the casket is unearthed. The ancestor's bones are carefully cleaned, wrapped in silk, and then reburied, so that finally he can segue into the next life. It can be a very emotional time as the relatives and friends go through the grieving process once again. Sometimes the dead are buried in nearby fields or gardens so that the ghosts of the dear ones can watch the activities of their children and grandchildren. 7% of the Vietnamese are Catholic. St. Joseph's Cathedral in Hanoi, built in 1888, is the oldest and largest church in Hanoi. In 1798, the Emperor of Vietnam feared the spread of Catholicism, So he issued the order that Catholics should be persecuted. Many people sought refuge in the rainforest of Lavon. People began to experience severe illnesses. The community gathered every night at the foot of a tree to pray the rosary. One night they were surprised by the appearance of a lady wearing a traditional Vietnamese dress and holding a child in her arms. There were two angels beside her. The lady comforted them and told them how to cure their illnesses. She appeared several times to encourage them. To commemorate this event, a church was built in 1886. It was completed in 1901, but then destroyed during the Vietnam War in 1972. In 2012, a basilica was built to replace the destroyed church. Work continues today on the interior of the basilica. Every year, many Catholics make a pilgrimage to this site in August. It hasn't been just the Christians who have been persecuted in Vietnam. Prime Minister Diem served as the first president of South Vietnam from 1955 to 1963. He was a staunch Roman Catholic and ordered the persecution of the Buddhists. To protest this policy, around 350 monks and nuns marched in two columns, preceded by a car carrying a 67-year-old monk. They denounced the Dim government and its policy toward Buddhists, demanding that it fulfill its promises of religious equality. They stopped at this busy Saigon intersection. The monk got out of the car, seated himself on a mattress, closed his eyes in meditation, and his body was lit on fire. Legend has it that his body never quivered or moved as he burned. Photographs of his self immolation circulated around the world, drawing attention to the policies of the Dinh government. John F. Kennedy said of one of the photographs, "No news picture in history has generated so much attention around the world as this one." Today, the memorial at the corner of the busy intersection in Saigon documents the events of that day. The houses in Vietnam are tall and narrow. They are only about 13 feet wide. They build them this way due to a mix of high population density and expensive land prices. The first floor is often a shop of some sort. The kitchen and sitting room are located on the second floor, and the bedrooms and baths are on the third floor. On the fourth floor, the ancestry worship room can be found, along with the laundry. The water supply for each house is on the roof in a stainless steel tank. There is a pump at the ground floor that is turned on once in a while to refill the tank from the underground city water supply or the well. Water pressure from the city or the well is not enough to get water to the upper stories. That is the reason for the tank, to feed the bathrooms and other water sources on the upper floors. Watch for the narrow houses and the stainless steel tanks as we travel through the outskirts of Saigon. The electric and communication power lines have become a tangled mess and a fire hazard for the residents. In Saigon in 2017, the wires started to be placed underground. In 2021, the same project was begun in Hanoi.
There is still much work to be completed to remedy this situation. Vietnam is considered the center of the motorcycle industry in Asia. Since 2010, the average annual sales of motorcycles in Vietnam reached 3 million units. Motorcycles are parked on the sidewalk near establishments. Often there is a security guard on the sidewalk. Cars remain unaffordable for most people. The average income per family is about $7,000 a year, so it might take around 12 years to save enough money to buy a car. This is a taxi driver waiting for a passenger. Taxi drivers and tour guides carry helmets and raincoats for their passengers. Most men and women riding motor scooters are totally covered, even on a very warm day. They do not want their skin to darken from the rays of the sun. Crossing the streets in any major city or village is quite an undertaking. In Hanoi, one positions himself on the curb, and when there appears to be even the smallest break, he starts to cross, holding his hand in the air, like you could really stop the traffic. One proceeds with caution at a steady, even pace, no running or slowing down. The drivers of the mopeds seem to be able to judge whether they can go in front of you or behind you without hitting you. In Saigon, one is only to cross at the traffic lights, but don't cross if it's a flashing green. That means it will turn red soon and the motorbikes and the cars will just start going. Hanoi is located in the northern part of Vietnam. On July 2, 1976, following the pullout of American troops, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam was proclaimed, and Hanoi was established as its capital. On our walk along the back streets of Hanoi, we met a lovely lady who was 102 years old. When she was 6 years old, her teeth were blackened, which was an ancient custom followed by the women in the early 1900s in Hanoi. The shiny black lacquered teeth were a sign of beauty. It was thought that white teeth belonged only to animals, savages, and evil spirits. This is where the body of Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam's communist founding father, is on display in a glass coffin. He died in 1969 during the Vietnam War. His body was taken to a top secret site in the jungle, and a team of Russian scientists were flown into the country to begin the long process of embalming his body. American troops were actively searching for his body because they could have used it as a bargaining tool for forcing the Vietnamese soldiers to release American POWs. Uncle Hole's body requires regular maintenance and occasional re embalming. Russian scientists who understand the techniques used to preserve Lenin's body are regularly called on to help with this maintenance. Tourists come to northern Vietnam to enjoy the scenery and the beaches. A visit to Trang Nhan is not complete without taking a boat ride with one of the foot rowers. The stronger currents and often choppy waters make arm rowing difficult, so the rowers use their feet instead. Halong Bay, with its many islands and beaches, is a very popular spot. More than 7 million visitors annually enjoy the rainforest topped limestone islands of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. On one of the islands in Hunlong Bay is the Sun Suk Cave. It is the most beautiful and spacious cave in the entire bay. On one of the islands, tourists take shuttles or bike up the mountain to a little village for lunch. But before lunch, tourists can enjoy a fish pedicure. The fish in the pool go to work snacking on the person's dead skin cells. It is suspected that the fish are not fed regularly, so eagerly approach the tourists' feet.
You do? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a video of this, Gary. Oh my gosh. Oh, they're really good. Are you not going there? Really going? Oh. Oh. It better be worthwhile. Oh.
With so many annual visitors, refuge has become a huge problem. Plastic water bottles are banned on all tourist boats. The government hires people to collect the trash. Styrofoam, plastic bottles, and beer bottles are among the other trash. These people spend long hours daily doing this job. Hue is a city in central Vietnam, 2 hours north of Da Nang and 3 hours south of the DMZ. It was established as the capital of unified Vietnam in 1802 and remained so until the last royal dynasty of Vietnamese history ended in 1945. Tourists can experience an evening dinner as royalty with the king and queen chosen from their group of friends. Da Nang is an important port city in central Vietnam. It is considered a cultural and educational center. One of the tourist attractions is the 6-lane Dragon Bridge, which was designed and built in the shape of a dragon. Every Saturday and Sunday evening at 9 p.m., visitors go to the bridge to watch the dragon breathe fire and water from its mouth. South of Da Nang is the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Hoi An, the City of Lanterns. Eating, walking along the streets, and riding in a boat along the river provide a lovely evening at this special place. Saigon is the largest city in Vietnam. It was formerly the capital of South Vietnam. After the American troops left, it was renamed Ho Chi Minh City, but both names are still used today. A visit to Saigon would not be complete without exploring the turbulent history of Vietnam. The Vietnamese people have been involved in war since the beginning of time, attempting to secure liberation from emperors and foreign entities. Sometimes they emerged successful, and other times they did not. In the 3 centuries preceding the French arrival in 1881, the Vietnamese were ruled by a series of emperors. France occupied Vietnam from 1881 to 1945 for economic reasons. In 1945, after World War II, Communist leader Ho Chi Minh captured Hanoi and declared Vietnam independent. The French tried to take control again, but this was unpopular with the people. The French were defeated by Ho Chi Minh forces in 1954. In 1954, the French left Vietnam, and the country split along the 17th parallel until elections were held. Elections were never held. North Vietnam was a communist republic led by communist leader Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam was a capitalist republic led by unpopular and corrupt leader President Dinh. The United States, fearing communism would spread, supported the South Vietnamese leader as the country became involved in a civil war. In 1963, President Dinh was overthrown, and no strong capitalist government remained in control of the South. In August of 1964, the North Vietnamese attacked a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. Following the attack, the U.S. Congress gave President Lyndon Johnson permission to wage war on North Vietnam. That was the beginning of our more intense involvement in Vietnam.
Many of the South Vietnamese people were unhappy, and the North Vietnamese leader Ho Chi Minh wanted to unite the country. Preparations were made for one of the most important attacks of the Vietnam War, the Tet Offensive, carried out at the end of January 1968. In Saigon, several secret arsenal hideouts were established.
The owner of this house was a wealthy contractor who was responsible for the furniture in the Independence Palace, the nerve center of the Saigon government. He was well respected and had free access to the palace, but unbeknownst to those around him, his allegiance was to North Vietnam. In early 1966, Lai bought 3 houses in a row along the alley, as they were adjacent to the 2 main roads of the city. He started to build a secret cellar under them. Because the construction had to be secretive, the excavation was conducted at night, and all the dugout soil was transported by cars to the suburbs. By the end of 1967, Lai had amassed more than 2 tons of weaponry, including explosives, guns, grenades, and bullets. In January of 1968, during the Tet New Year celebrations, a coordinated attack was launched by the North Vietnamese and the Communist Viet Cong forces on Independence Palace, as well as on other targets throughout South Vietnam. These losses severely weakened the U.S. public support for the war and intensified the protests. Following the Tet Offensive, President Johnson announced he would not seek a second term as president, as the citizens were beginning to realize a victory would not be possible for a very long time, or if ever. A visit to Saigon must include a visit to the Cu Chi Tunnel system. The tunnels of Cu Chi are an enormous network of connecting tunnels located near Saigon. They are a part of a much larger network of tunnels that underlie much of the country. These tunnels were the location of military campaigns during the Vietnam War, and they were used by the Viet Cong as communication and supply routes, hospitals and living quarters, food, and weapons storage. The tunnels lie underneath the jungle floor. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers entered the tunnels through hidden entrances. There were hidden booby traps of all types. The horrors of war became even more vivid, viewing these traps and listening to the gunfire on a shooting range in close proximity to these exhibits. The War Museum, housed in Independence Palace, brings the visitors even closer to the reality of the horror of torture used by the French and then during the Vietnam War. Tiger cages were weaved by interlacing barbed wire around and on top of it. They were placed outdoors. Prisoners had to lie on the sandy soil in these very narrow cages. Prison wardens forced prisoners to remove their clothes and roll over and over on this iron grill. The small hooks on the grill snatched their hair, peeled at their skin and scalp until it bled. Sunbathing rooms built by the French in 1940 were outdoor confinement areas where prisoners were forced to strip naked and exposed to scorching heat, cold rain, or freezing evening fog for many hours at a time. On April 30th, 1975, the South Vietnamese capital of Saigon fell to the North Vietnamese army, effectively ending the war. In the days before, U.S. forces evacuated thousands of Americans and South Vietnamese. American diplomats were on the front lines, organizing what would be the most ambitious helicopter evacuation in history. From April 29th to April 30th, helicopters landed at 10-minute intervals in the embassy, including landing on the embassy roof. Some pilots flew 19 hours straight. Over 7,000 people were evacuated, including 5,500 Vietnamese, in less than 24 hours. While visiting central Vietnam near the DMZ border, visitors explore the important battle sites of Khe Sanh and My Lai. Before the Tet Offensive in early 1968, Khe Sanh Combat Base gained worldwide attention as the roughly 6,000 Marines defending the base were encircled and besieged by three North Vietnamese Army regiments of about 20,000 troops. For 77 days, the Marines and their South Vietnamese counterparts, with support from an element of U.S. Army soldiers and U.S. Air Force bombers, would endure one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War. For the first 30 days of the siege, no supplies were delivered to the base because the enemy kept shooting down the helicopters. Someone came up with the idea that the U.S. pilots would bring in jets and bomb the area near the base, then put up a smokescreen. The helicopters would then arrive 5 at a time with the needed supplies. In order to hold on to the base, the U.S. Air Force dropped 100,000 tons of bomb on the surrounding mountain. stripped the forest bare with Agent Orange, and incinerated them with napalm. U.S. forces eventually abandoned the base at Khe Sing in July of 1968. The My Lai massacre also happened in central Vietnam. It was so horrible that when reported in the U.S., the anti-war sentiments greatly intensified. On March 16, 1968, a company of American soldiers led by First Lieutenant William Calley entered My Lai, where mostly women, children, and old men lived. The troops met no resistance as they entered the village. No Viet Cong were hiding in the huts. However, Calley and his troops brutally slaughtered more than 500 people. Young women and girls were raped and mutilated before being killed. While the massacre was occurring, Hugh Thompson Jr., an observation helicopter pilot, and his crew observed that something was terribly wrong. He landed the helicopter between the soldiers and the villagers and said that if anyone shoots another villager, they would be immediately shot. The question was, how could this happen? It is thought that the psychological toll the war had created on the soldiers caused them to just snap. Calley was convicted of premeditated murder, but served only a short sentence. Hanoi is famous for its beautiful lakes and pagodas. Among the notable lakes in Hanoi, Truc Bac Lake and West Lake stand out as captivating natural gems. On the west shore of Truc Bac Lake, there is a memorial commemorating the capture of John McCain. John McCain was considered a celebrity because his father and grandfather were both admirals in the U.S. Navy. On October 26, 1967, the U.S. Navy pilot was shot down by an anti aircraft missile on a mission against a Hanoi power plant. He parachuted wounded into Truc Bac Lake. He was dragged out of the water, confronted by angry North Vietnamese, and turned over to the military as a prisoner of war. In 1968, he refused a North Vietnamese offer of early release because it would have meant leaving before other prisoners who had been held longer. John McCain was released in 1973 after the Paris Peace Accords. He spent 5.5 years as a POW. Part of that time, he was a resident at the Hanoi Hilton. The prison was known for its torture and execution of prisoners of war. The prison is no longer there, but the gatehouse has been turned into a museum. For some, visiting Vietnam is a pilgrimage. For others, it is an opportunity to explore, experience, and grow. Since the horrors of war, Vietnam has moved from one of the world's poorest and most isolated countries into a middle class country with a promising future. Visitors will remember the Vietnamese for their sidewalk culture, eating, shopping, socializing, and exercising. The Vietnamese and their motorbikes will be a memory not soon forgotten. Visitors may have added a couple of inches to their waistline after partaking of the delicious family style food offerings. The perseverance, resilience, and forward thinking of this underdog nation
that just would not quit and came out of adversity stronger as a nation will be admired for a long time. Thank you, Vietnam, for an experience of a lifetime.